China went to Sudan because at the time in the 1990s, China's oil industry was in quite dire straits. So Chinese national oil companies noticed that oil production from oil fields in China was stagnating. And the only way to really get high levels of growth was to invest abroad. So one of the leading Chinese national oil companies, CNPC, the China National Petroleum Corporation, they were the first to move out, to go abroad, and they made a big splash in Sudan in 1995. And what followed was really this typical story of China and Africa. So a big Chinese state oil giant getting support from its government in the form of financial loans, diplomatic support, and going to exploit an African country's oil resources, where the African countries usually seems quite submissive. But this was not the case in Sudan. What was going on in Sudan was that Sudan's domestic and foreign politics basically opened up the door for China to enter. There was a civil war in the 1980s that pushed American oil companies out of the country. The United States government put sanctions on Sudan in the late 1990s, basically opening the way for Chinese and other Asian investment to come in. But it was more than that. The Sudanese were actually courting the Chinese for many years, trying to get Chinese national oil companies to invest before they were successful in finally attracting CNPC by the mid-1990s. So this is actually a case of China-Africa relations where there's sort of two ways of influence, that Africa also plays a role in drawing in the Chinese, and not just the Chinese dictating the terms. So in the 1990s, the Sudan, when it was united, was sort of like a launching pad for Chinese national oil companies to expand internationally. It was the place where the China National Petroleum Corporation, CNPC, really became a global corporation. Sudan was where it first made significant profits and oil production. And Sudan was also where CNPC took its many construction and oil service companies, subsidiaries, abroad for the first time, and they cut their international teeth in the Sudan. But after around a decade of commercial success, the story of Sudan for China turned into one of overseas insecurity and political risk. So CNPC started having workers kidnapped, killed, and oil fields were shut down because of political disputes between Sudan and South Sudan and conflict. In response, CNPC really started to think more clearly about its security and political risk management. It started to give training to its staff on security. It started to implement early warning systems in all of its subsidiaries, and it started to have a really expansive intelligence gathering initiative. Nowhere else than Sudan and South Sudan has Beijing been forced to stretch this long-standing foreign policy of non-interference in domestic countries. And Beijing now is sort of locked in crisis diplomacy, trying to protect its investments, trying to protect its citizens that are in the Sudans, but also trying to play a bigger role as a responsible actor through engaging in peace talks. So we see that the Sudan's really had this impact both on Chinese corporations and on China's foreign policy.